Hi everyone. For those who want to go ahead and find out what the best internet connection is, you might want to go ahead and see this free video. It will explain the difference between, the spectrums of, a gigahertz versus the 0.1 and the 5 gigahertz, what the variations between that, and certain things important to understand, so that way when you see the facts of who is actually the fastest, you will understand and can relate to this topic. So go ahead and watch this video first and stay tuned for the next video to let you know which one service internet provider is actually truly the fastest. So go ahead and know the difference between the two versus broadband and dial-up. Okay, dial-up runs on the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, as for the broadband, it runs on the 5 gigahertz spectrum. So we're going to go ahead and explain the difference between the two with it and why one is different from the other. Here you can go ahead and listen.
Way back when Wi-Fi first came out, there were two versions that you could choose from: 802.11a and 802.11b. From a consumer perspective, there wasn't much difference between the two. Devices based on 802.11b were generally less expensive and more readily available than those based on 802.11a, so the B specification quickly became the consumer standard. 802.11b operates in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. These days, it's getting pretty crowded, and to help address the digital noise that comes with it, 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is making a comeback. 802.11 at 2.4 gigahertz.
Let's a little bit know about more about the 82.11a gigahertz, where it came from and when it was made. These technologies have been out for a while, but I don't really pay attention to it. So.
802.11a was a standard in 1999 which promised to bring network connections to devices delivered over the air instead of through copper cables. It was built around the 5 gigahertz spectrum, but failed to gain much traction in the market, being the first Wi-Fi protocol. It faced a steep learning curve and deployment problems which delayed the deployment of 802.11 networks. Also, components that operate on 5 gigahertz were generally more expensive and harder to come by than 2.4 gigahertz components.
Now we're going to go ahead and see what's the difference between the 182B and 2 gigahertz.
During this phase of 802.11a's growing pains, the 802.11b specification was being worked on. It offered basically the same features as 802.11a, but used less expensive and more readily available components. Due to these factors, 802.11b saw significant adoption amongst home and small office users, whereas 802.11 only saw any level of success in enterprise network environments. Popularity of Wi-Fi began to grow, and the standards that backed it continued to improve.
Okay, and then later on, we went up a little bit more to 0.831G, also parentheses as the 2.4 gigahertz. That's what we commonly use now.
.11g, 2.4 gigahertz. By 2003, a new standard had been ratified, though many devices were using the 802.11g draft specification prior to the date that it was made official. This version of the Wi-Fi standard brought many of the stability features of 802.11a and the inexpensive componentry of 802.11b, improved upon them, and upped the speed to 54 Mbps. Consumers were thrilled, and this is still one of the more popular versions of Wi-Fi available today. Unfortunately, it still uses the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, which, as you might have suspected, is getting pretty crowded now that all these Wi-Fi devices are operating on the same frequencies.
Okay, so what it's saying is not only is your dial-up internet using it, but also your cell phones, the things like that are also connected to it. Your iPads are also it's free networking, free privacy. Notice that it's being kicked off, slow down, and it's irregularities and being easy to get hacked into these programs. That's what happens sometimes when things get overcrowded. No one can keep up with the maintenance. Now, like if it was Bluetooth and even microwaves and wireless peripherals, I'm going to go ahead and talk about that.
Bluetooth, microwaves, and wireless peripherals. Almost everyone has a microwave in their house. Some of them emit some of the radiation used to warm up your pizza outside of the unit. No, it's not supposed to do that, but some do, especially as they get older and components start to break down. In addition to being harmful to your health, their spurious emissions cause bursts of noise around the 2.4 GiHertz spectrum that can severely interfere with your wireless signal. If you find that you're in this situation, you might want to consider replacing your microwave oven. Bluetooth used to be limited to headsets and other special use equipment, but as its PSR set increased, devices using Bluetooth increased too, and not just in number, but in the bandwidth they use and the amount of time they're turned on. Bluetooth speakers and docks are a good example of this, though wearables are quickly becoming more commonplace as well. Keyboards, mice, trackpads, and trackballs can use Bluetooth to connect, and even those that use their own proprietary wireless hardware are typically still using 2.4 GiHertz.
Now, here is going to explain a little bit more about the 2.11 and even 2 GiHertz or the 5 GiHertz in comparison.
(802.11n), 2.4 GiHertz or 5 GiHertz. When 802.11n came around in 2009, it brought with it the ability to communicate up to 600 Mbps. What's more, 802.11n also included the ability to work in either the 2.4 GiHertz or 5 GiHertz spectra. Like the other standards before it, 802.11n was backwards compatible with its predecessors. Unfortunately, since most devices already on the market were already using 2.4 GiHertz, most 802.11n wireless access points stuck to 2.4 GiHertz as the primary operating frequency, and some devices didn't even include the hardware to use 5 GiHertz at all. Some let you pick between 2.4 GiHertz and 5 GiHertz operation, not both. But since most people still have some 2.4 GiHertz devices, they kept their networks on 2.4 GiHertz rather than making the switch across the board.
That's what it's talking about, is when you have your connection, basically your modem, and then you have your wireless connector. If you don't get the wireless connector that has the 5 GiHertz with it, you're pretty much selling yourself your own internet. So it's how you connect the two that makes a big difference.
(802.11 Act was ratified in January 2014. The devices based on the draft specification were available for months prior. This standard brings the maximum data rates up to 1 Gbps, almost double that of 802.11n. In most 802.11 Act wireless access points, both 2.4 GiHertz and 5 GiHertz hardware is included, though most segregate the traffic from each onto its own network.
Okay, now the advantages of 5 GiHertz, right?
Finally, users can take advantage of the reduced noise available in the 5 GiHertz spectrum. This will provide faster data rates, fewer disconnects, and a more enjoyable experience. It may even help you run faster and jump higher, but that study is still pending. Bluetooth and other wireless peripherals aren't going to bother you in the 5 GiHertz spectrum, so there's less interference. Microwaves don't operate up here, not even newer ones, so that source of noise is eliminated too. There are many more reasons why 802.11n is better than others, but this article is about switching to the 5 GiHertz spectrum, rather than about 802.11n specifically. With a compatible router or WAP, your 802.11n0 or 802.11n smartphone or tablet will work much better. With the stronger the signal and faster the throughput, less power is required to get your signal above the noise floor, which should result in better battery life in addition to better network performance. Not all of your devices are going to have 5 GHz compatibility built in. Those will still work every bit as well as they did before on 2.4 GHz, but will work even better now that you'll be offloading traffic from that network and putting onto your 5 GHz network. Lastly, there are some potential disadvantages. Given the same power, the higher the frequency, the shorter the distance a signal can travel. That means your signal may not travel as far as it would have on a 2.4 GHz network. Since the signals may not travel as far, that means you may not have as much interference from neighbors as you would have on 2.4 GHz. Neither will your neighbors, which could very well be a major advantage to both you and them. Another potential advantage is that 5 GHz signals may be able to get into places that 2.4 GHz couldn't reach because of the size of their waveforms. All in all, I'd highly recommend that you upgrade your router or WAP to 802.11 AC and set up both 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz networks. Then move as much of your wireless traffic to the 5 GHz side as possible. You'll have less noise, less interference, better speeds, a more stable connection, and possibly even better battery life. What more could you want?
Okay, so that was said. It's not still setting that it actually is an internet provider that provides the 5 GHz to me and with compatibility to 2.4 GHz. That is actually Charter.